Let me bring my slides up.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Okay, can you see this? Just one slide?
Yes.
Okay.
No, we can see presentation, how to say, mode.
Okay, how
The
do,
presenter screen we can see.
how do I access this without?
So, Goltz, do you need notes? Or if you don't need notes, just, thumb off. Do you need note?
Yeah, probably do. It's useful.
Right.
So
Well, the thing is, Jim, probably you are using two screens.
okay.
So when you share, make sure you share the screen that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
now
what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to take a step back into my role as an emergency manager. My talk is somewhat autobiographical, and it draws on my experience as an emergency manager, as well as a social scientist. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the struggle that social scientists have had in terms of acceptability in various aspects of implementation of earth science developments. So I'd like to also bring your attention to an early sociologist, George Andrew Lundberg, who was an American sociologist. His dates are 1895 to 1966. He had a PhD in sociology from the University of Minnesota. And he spent most of his career at the University of Washington. He was the 33rd president of the American Sociological Society. And because that particular name had a rather unfortunate acronym, the association became the American Sociological Association in 1959. His most notable work was Can Science Save Us? It was first published in 1947. And the message of this essay was that science has a positive impact on improving the lives of people. The developments in science often raise social issues that are best addressed by other disciplines. These other disciplines include engineering, public policy, planning, and social science that can facilitate the transition from discovery to application. And the contributions of these facilitating disciplines is often underappreciated, and being less visible and frequently underfunded complicates the implementation process. Now, one of the things that early on, I guess in my career, I was hired as an outreach coordinator for something called the TriNet project in Southern California. And that project was a federally funded project to upgrade the Southern California seismic network. This was done after the 1994 Northridge earthquake, in which it took an inordinately long time just to get a magnitude of the earthquake rather than other parameters that were useful to emergency management. So in the context of being an outreach manager, I felt that I had some role in implementation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how that worked out and my own experience in doing that. And I'm going to use Lundberg as an example because early on in this project, in which I was the outreach coordinator, I heard a scientist say, why should we put scarce resources into outreach? Let's just do good science and the users of our research will figure out how to utilize it. This motivated me on two levels. First of all, it redoubled my motivation to actually find good applications for what scientists were talking about in terms of a new seismic network. But it also motivated me to write a paper, which was published in the opinion section of Seismological Research Letters in 2003. So I'm going to kind of use this particular situation to talk about implementation. Now, outreach, as I think all of you would agree, is not implementation, but a step in that direction through the identification and communication of practical applications for basic scientific research. I would say that implementation is the end state of knowledge and technology transfer that perhaps begins with outreach. So in looking into what implementation science actually is, I kept running into this particular definition that I found on a website from the University of Washington. And what it says is that implementation science is a scientific study of methods and strategies that facilitate the uptake of evidence-based practice and research into regular use by practitioners and policymakers, which is a kind of convoluted way to say the second bullet point, which I think is much more direct and straightforward, which the field of implementation science seeks to systematically close the gap between what we know and what we do by identifying and addressing the barriers that slow or halt the uptake of proven interventions and evidence-based practices. Now, this was applied to health, and I think that this was probably a statement from public health educators, but I thought that it was an interesting definition, and it gave me some perspective, at least for this particular talk. But the issues that I addressed in that paper from 2003 was that the process of raising awareness and applying the products of science receives less adequate attention and resources from the scientific community. Thus, my response to the scientists' derogation of scientific outreach was, left to their own devices, potential users of scientific research will neither use it nor in all likelihood even become aware of it. And why was this so? Scientists are concerned with advancing the knowledge base in their fields, not necessarily teasing out the practical implications of the research for potential users. Outreach costs money that some scientists argued should be better spent on research, on training students, purchasing of equipment, and research itself. And finally, scientists may not be rewarded or supported and may even be penalized for pursuing outreach activities and conducting applied research. So some of the effective barriers or the barriers to effective paths to implementation were things like disciplinary silos and organizational cultures. At the time of my writing, basically, disciplines were very inward looking. They had their own departments, they had their own journals, they had their own annual meetings, they had their own organizational culture and specialized language, which didn't necessarily make itself amenable to users, particularly emergency management users of earth science information. We didn't generally attend their meetings or read their journals, so it was difficult as an emergency manager to see what was new in terms of earth science. Also, there were barriers to applied research and by extension to interdisciplinary research. I think most of the departments at the time were fairly inward looking, and applied research was not particularly rewarded. Basic research was what was rewarded. I think also funding agencies did little more than insist that scientific endeavors have a dissemination plan, which often only resulted in the publication of a journal paper, not necessarily any type of implementation outreach to potential users. And finally, implementation costs were not necessarily part of research proposals or research funding. So there wasn't a lot of incentive to actually do implementation of the kinds of things that, that we needed in terms of emergency management. So some of the outreach strategies for promoting implementation that I addressed in this paper were that scientific data must be translated into some kind of meaningful information. The fact that the kinds of applications that earth science information would provide were just simply not turned into usable products, at least from the scientific community standpoint. Also, I think that it involves selecting an appropriate audience for implementation. One of the things that was visualized in terms of the TriNet project was that new digital seismic instruments, real-time telemetry, the densification of networks would provide an ability to provide earthquake early warning. So one of the things that we did, at least I did from the standpoint of outreach, was to conduct a series of studies of what institutional sectors might actually be able to use a few seconds to a few tens of seconds of advance warning that ground motion from a large earthquake was approaching. So selecting target audiences was really quite important. I think accessible language was also necessary. Products must be in formats that are accessible to non-scientists. Most of the people in emergency management would have a difficult time understanding a journal article and sometimes a presentation at a professional meeting to understand how what was being developed in earth science would be usable by their own profession. I also thought that participation and recognition were important. It would have been possible, I think, to include representatives of user groups in a research effort, often as advisors or at least as observers, would be useful for implementation. I think funding agencies' role would be to require more than a dissemination strategy that involved publication in a scientific journal. I know that the National Science Foundation and maybe other funding agencies around the country and perhaps around the globe were gradually over this period of time asking for more in terms of implementation than just a dissemination strategy. And I also concluded that social scientists or people with social science backgrounds might be well positioned to play this role of implementer and be able to navigate between disciplines without getting too bogged down in organizational cultures. So I wanted to also point out some examples where social science has been very influential in the development and implementation of usable products by emergency management. Earthquake early warning is one of the areas in which I think social scientists have made major contributions. I think for one thing, in a broader context, social scientists have dispelled some of the myths that surrounded warning behavior on the part of recipients of warnings. Generally, the myths of panic, of incapacity of people to understand, inability to take particular actions on their own behalf. And also, in terms of messages, I think that social scientists have provided very good guidance in terms of what kinds of messages will actually trigger the kinds of behavior that we need to have in terms of tsunamis and of earthquakes and perhaps other hazards as well. The other thing that came out of this project to upgrade the seismic network was a lot more in the way of information rather than just an earthquake epicenter. There developed something called ShakeMap, which very quickly estimated the probable ground motion parameters for a particular earthquake. And not only was this useful in terms of response, it was also important in the development of scenarios. The United States Geological Survey developed shake maps for all of the historic earthquakes that occurred in California over the last 100 years or so. There were really quite a number of them, and it was very helpful for emergency managers in that before ShakeMap, basically it was a back of the envelope kind of estimate as to what kind of earthquake might occur in their jurisdiction, how large it might be, what kind of damage might occur. And so the ShakeMap was a very, very important development. And also a third development I think has also been very important. After Northridge, the Federal Emergency Management Agency commissioned the development of a GIS-based loss estimation software called HAZUS. And it involved various overlays of population, building inventories, population movement, geologic kinds of consideration, liquefaction areas, landslide areas. And in combination with a shake map, these tools gave emergency managers an incredible ability to anticipate what type of seismic activity they might experience in their jurisdictions. And with HAZUS loss estimations, they could get a pretty good idea of the impact of various earthquakes they were likely to see over the courses of their career. These tools became real time more recently. And I think the combination of these three things were really very, very important implementation of earth science understanding and earth science developments, and also technological developments. So where are we now? Are we there yet? Which every child says from the back seat of a car. But I think over the long term, over the 20 years that have elapsed since I wrote that article and since we had the development of these tools that I just described, there were social scientists at small number of disaster centers around the country. And now I think we can say that social scientists have become far more integrated into major disaster warning, response, and mitigation efforts in the United States. I think a second development we've seen over this time is that PhD programs are now more amenable to interdisciplinary studies and applied research. And third, social scientists have become active participants in organizations that were more disciplinary specific at the time. The Seismological Society of America, the Earthquake Engineering Research Institutes are examples of that. There are also many new journals that have emerged that encourage interdisciplinary collaboration and applied research. And of course, we have new organizations that have emerged like IDRiM that bring together scholars from multiple disciplines, kind of breaking down these barriers and dismantling the silos that we experienced earlier. And I think finally, the most important thing, social scientists have made major contributions to scientific implementation in the earth sciences. And I hope what I've presented tonight are some good examples of that. And that essentially ends my talk. And I'd be happy to address any questions or comments.